I drink so much coffee.
Ready, Freddie? Can you see, Kelly?
Please, you're dripping down inside of you. That water's dripping out the back.
Is it?
Y'all over your pants.
Oh, well.
What can I do? Here.
Yeah, the movie making business now.
I mean, Dr. Hernandez is your uncle,
Oh, yeah.
and Miguel is your great.
I don't want to feel.
And
And I work with both of them.
you still managed to make it this long. We're happy to have you. Yeah, well,
She's already passed the first test to be a teacher. Work on your day off. Hi, thanks. Anthony, I think you've gotten taller.
Are you still driving?
He looks taller, doesn't he?
The mic is hot.
all right. Briggs over ready? Dale over ready?
We're ready.
Deb over ready? Okay. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone back. And do express my appreciation to your patience and willingness to adjust because of our project going on down in the auditorium. But it will be a much better place for us to do. In the meantime, we are finding ways to adjust and continue our work. So the first thing that we need to do is approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was July 26.
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the minutes as written.
So motion by Ms. Flowers, second by Senator English. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by the same sign? Motion is adopted. Just a second. Get to the right page here. All right. So next item is Ms. Kaufman, and she's going to present on the data that we've had modeled with the ESSA school index, and we'll have some discussion and ask you all for some input on that. So Deb, we'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, and just let you know, Dr. Arola is not with us today. She's celebrating her daughter's wedding this weekend, so take it easy on me. We've got 4 things I want to cover today with you. One is going over the application has been submitted. The second part is looking at how data are showing on our indicator, so you can kind of see how the indicator is working. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to do with that data, and then how do we plan for communication. And so all these months we've worked together with our stakeholders to put together this application, but that's really just the plan for the work. Now we've got to work the plan. And so that's what I want to go over with you today and start thinking about that conversation of how do we begin to work that plan. So the ESSA application was submitted September 15th. We have documentation from the federal government that they did receive our application as of September 18th, and we are now in the queue. There will be peer review going on. From that peer review, we expect to get a phone call someday from a federal team to discuss our plan, to go over any of the notes from the peer reviewers. They will then probably send us an official letter with anything that they want us to address. Other states have had this similar process, and other states have gone in and redlined their applications so that the stakeholders could see what they've been asked to look at and how they responded to that. And I'm assuming, Tina, that we'll do something very similar if that's your request, and certainly would be the most transparent way to communicate with the general public. Just because there's something that's brought up from peer review does not mean that we have to address it, but it's certainly something that caught their attention that would cause us to go back in and look at it. So in preparation for that timeline, and we know we have 120 days before we should be approved, and we're forecasting that out to be January of 2018. So knowing that sometime in between there, we will hear that, we'll plan for that call and for that letter, and then once we receive our letter, we'll have 15 days to respond. So we don't want to wait till then. We're already going back through our plan and looking at it and saying, okay, with a new set of eyes and fresh set of eyes, is there a place where we could have explained something better now that we're going to more meetings and other states have submitted? We're having conversations with other states to see how they thought through those same situations and listening to all the different scenarios. So we are already in that process, and we hope that all of our patrons are reading the ESSA school plan. The ESSA plan, it is on our website, the full document that we submitted, and we encourage everyone to go in and read that. Any questions about that? Have you heard from stakeholders, if they're reading it, if they've looked at it? No conversations? Everybody's waiting to see what we're going to do?
A little bit of conversation I've had with some of the ESL professionals is they've read over the section pertaining to L's, but they haven't gotten into a lot of the accountability parts.
Okay. So I encourage you as a steering committee to go back in and read it again and make your notes and send those to Tina. Any note that you get as you're reading through, is there a place where we might explain, not really clear about what this piece is? Any of that feedback is going to be helpful for us because we're doing the same thing right now. Commissioner Key?
The feedback that I have is a thought, and I think it's based on reading outside information rather than looking at our plan. There's still that thought that for the Title IV section, that there's this pot of ESSA money that's out there, and what we continue to explain is that there's no ESSA money. It's a different way of determining how you spend the federal dollars, Title IV, Title I, Title II, all those things. That it's a different way of determining how to allocate those dollars. And so when we talk about that, especially on the Title IV, that particular section, you know, we stress that there are programs that in our state we support, but as far as how that money is spent at the local level, that's where the meaningful stakeholder engagement has to come into play. That's where those local conversations need to be. That's why they're important to determine the allocation of those dollars.
On all of us to make sure that Arkansans all over the state understand what we're trying to accomplish with this plan. So as steering committee members, you know, you've got to be talking to people as we continue to conduct advisory committee meetings, as we continue to put information out on our website. It's just incumbent upon all of us. It's our due diligence to help everyone understand what this really is. So thank you for that. And as I said, as you're reading back through, anything that comes up, just any little place that you say, man, I think you could have done just a little bit better explaining this part, then just let us know, because those are the parts we want to go back in and revisit and be ready for that phone call. So what I'm going to share with you today is Dr. Arola and her team have gone through and done some modeling with 2016 data. And what I've learned about this process is, because we're doing a new system, that means that we have to write new business rules. So if this, then this, or if this, not this, those kind of business rules. And there are so many teeny tiny little decisions that have to be made, because we have so many different configurations, there are so many different situations that we're always having to go through and think about all of those and look at how the data are reporting out based on our index. So this ESSA school index, it's the first time we're implementing it. So it's going to take a little while to work through those and ask a lot of questions. And it's going to be very important that that all stakeholders are paying attention to this and looking at the data and giving us feedback as we move forward, because we're going to be revisiting this over and over. You know, we said from the very beginning, this is a plan that we don't just write and put out there. It's a plan that we have to work on all the time. The federal government is expecting that. All of the meetings that we're going to, they're saying, plan your amendments now. Be thinking about what needs to be adjusted in your plan so that it truly is an Arkansas accountability system. So as we look at this distribution, the first thing that we had to start with was grade configurations. And if you recall in the plan, we have K5, 6-8, and 9-12. And it's very interesting. Underneath it, you can see all of the various grade configurations in the state of Arkansas. And so those had to be put into those three categories of grade configurations. So this is the first tool to kind of help school districts think about where do my schools fall. The other thing that, as we think about our ESSA school index, we hear us talk a lot about the 5 indicators. But when I look at this list, I see 4 big bullets. And so often we talk about that very last one, school quality and student success, as the 5th indicator. So if I weren't deeply into this plan, that might be the first point of confusion. That 5th indicator is the 4th bullet, because 2 indicators were merged together in our plan. Not in every school, not in every state plan, but in our plan. So that's the first thing I wanted to kind of bring to your attention. But I wanted to start with our first indicator of weighted achievement. And if you recall, in weighted achievement, we looked at our ACT Aspire scores. And if a student scored in need of support, there were no points. If a student scored close, that student was assigned a half point. If the student scored ready, they were assigned 1 point. If the student scored exceeds, we gave 1 point per student up to the number of students that were in need of support. So if I had 50 students that scored exceeds, but I had 10 students that were in the bottom level of in need of support, then only the first 10 of that 50 only scored 1 point. The next set would score a 0.25. Okay? So that's a reward for school districts moving their kids in close, ready, and exceeds. And if you recall in our plan, there was a graphic that looked like this that kind of showed that model of, in that very last line, you have 2 kids in level 1 of in need of support. And so when we look at the 5 kids in exceeds, those first 2 are only scored with 1 point, and those 3 that are above the number of students in need of support, they were scored at 1.25 each. That weighted achievement score is then scaled from 0 to 100. And what I want to show you on the next 3 slides is based on this model data. Now, let me say this about this model data. It doesn't mean that it's exact, because we're using data that we're learning to write our business rules around. We'll have anomalies that we have to work out. That's why you test it on an old set of data, and that's what we're doing here. We're testing it on an old set of data. So as you look at this data, what I wanted you to see, and Denise has set all of the slides up the same so that you could see what's possible, 0 to 125. How can you get 125 points on a 100-point scale? How's that possible? A lot of exceeds kids and not many in need of support, right? That's how a school could achieve up to 125 points. What we see on this bottom line is the lowest score in the state for K-5 schools was 8. So a school scored 8 points. On the other end, a school scored 111 points out of that possible 125. But remember, our scale is really 0 to 100. So if you scored 111, you've got some bonus points going into this system, don't you? Any questions or any conversation about that distribution? Is it as you expect? Is it different from you expect?
And does that elementary cover like K through,
K5, and if we went back to that previous slide and all of those configurations of K5. So if we look at the 50th percentile, knowing that half of the schools are above and half of the schools are below, you would see the median percentile is 58 points. Middle grades, 6, 7, and 8. The lowest score was 4. The highest score was 105. What do you notice from the slide before? A little bit lower, right? The median score is 56. A little bit lower. High school. The lowest score was 1. The highest score was 114. The median score, 45. So, when we think about weighted achievement, tell me what strikes you about that data.
It's a wide range.
It's a wide range.
It's a big difference in, as far as starting, looking at kindergarten through 5th grade and going up through high school. And even though it doesn't seem a lot to go from 105 to doesn't seem like that it is. So, I'm just processing.
Speaks to the need for that vertical alignment.
Right.
It speaks to the need of how important core instruction is. It speaks to the need of, are all students being served?
On that chart, Deb, if you pull that 114 out,
Mhm.
because it's out there by itself, I guess the disturbing part is that would shift those other percentile scores, that median 50th percentile, you would see it drop a little bit more too,
Mhm.
which means, you know, that overall high school performance is far from where we want it to be.
So when we think about college and career ready, we still have work to be done. So we've been planning this work, and now it's time to work this plan. And part of working this plan is we're going to have to address the issues that our data are showing us, right? And that's to me, the most exciting thing about this work. This is not about putting a bad label on anybody. This is just saying, hey, this is how tall I am. This is how much I weigh. It's just the facts. So when we talk about our second and third indicator, if you recall, we merged those together, and Tricia Kerr and Dr. Rolla talked to us quite a bit about this, and I know some of you, Melissa served on one of those advisory committees where we had a lot of conversation about this. And as we think about growth, remember that our stakeholders wanted us to overwhelmingly put growth first. Give growth the most weight. Remember that? Everywhere we went, if you look back in the data from all of those stakeholder meetings, that's what everyone said they wanted. We want you to show the growth. Because even though some of our students may not be achieving at the exceeds level, we think they're really growing up to their potential. So let's look at that and see. In the growth, as we look at this, what I will weekly explain this, and Dr. Pfeffer jump in and help at any time, but we've had different growth models in our history, but the growth model that we're using currently is a value-added model that looks at what is a child's expected growth. We've had previous growth models that were growth to standard model, where once you got behind, you just really couldn't ever catch up. And what this growth, this value-added model allows you to do is look at what is a child's growth history. And you're able to look at that and say, oh, that's how that's how Harold has been previously growing. This is his expected growth. And so that we can recognize when you're continuing to meet your expected growth. That model, along with looking at our English learners, has helped us to kind of put these together. We've looked at this growth, and in the growth we look at 0. That's when you're meeting your expected growth, and some have grown more and some have grown less. And so when you put that onto a scale to look at, then we have to come back and apply some numbers, some numeric value to that to put it into our index. Our committee decided to proportionally add in our English language learners into this with their content and their growth. And so the number of 80 was assigned to where you had seen that 0. So if I meet my expected growth, I'm at 80 points. I could grow more, or I could grow less than I'm expected, and my score would represent that. Now, thinking about that, why didn't we put that number at a higher number? Why did we pick 80? You may remember that conversation?
It was something about expectations, going to a higher standard. Why would we expect?
Yeah, you've got to have a number that allows enough room to really show what those kids that are really growing, you've got to have enough room for them to demonstrate their growth. So here's what it looks like when we put it on a 100-point scale. The lowest score was 67 in the elementary, and the highest score was 90. So some kids grew well beyond what was expected. In fact, if you look at our median, so all of those stakeholders that said, hey, I want growth, knew something about half of the kids. Now what do we got to do about the other half? We got to buckle down, don't we? Right. That's what it looks like in elementary. Middle level, 67 is the low, 91 is the high. High school, 69, 93. That's why you don't just stop it at, say, move that number to 90 and go to 100, because some kids wouldn't be represented with their full amount of growth on there. But what happens to our distribution? Much smaller, isn't it? That really comes into play later on when we think about how we're going to use these numbers to understand what the data are telling us about the numeric values we've applied to growth. So if 80 was what was expected, then, but in the previous we expected more than that, now it begins to set us to thinking about, now how are we going to use this data? Any questions about growth? Any comments?
So now that they're combined, the growth and how is their index, how is that calculated again?
On the English learners? So it's calculated. So first of all, if you go back to this slide, remember we took their value, their growth, plus their content.
So they're equal.
So those two are added together to get the value-added score for English learners. But the English learners are applied proportionately within the full growth model. So if you had 10% of your students are English learners, then they would be 10%. That 10% would be added into the full growth calculation.
So it'll vary by
school,
school.
by your population.
Okay.
So if you have a large English learner population, it'll have a larger percentage.
Makes sense.
Which really, I'm really excited about how we've done this. When I'm listening to other states, they've all tried to do something very similar, because in using it, if it had been a standalone indicator, you would have had many schools that wouldn't have an N of 15, so they wouldn't have a score there, so their percentages would have been totally different. Or you either undervalue it or you've overvalued it into your total index. And so I'm really excited when we shared with other states how we had done it. They were like, oh, it makes a lot of sense. So I was really excited about the feedback we received from other states. Okay, our next component is adjusted cohort graduation rate. And if you recall, we've been using the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, but our stakeholders said, but we want you to also use 5-year. And we're super excited about that until we come up to the point of now we've got to calculate it. And so it was very interesting in our conversations with other states and with our technical advisory committee of how other states are calculating 5-year adjusted cohort and how we might do that. What are the business rules for doing that? We got really good feedback from other states. We got excellent feedback from our technical advisory committee about how to do that, and Denise is beginning to run some new numbers. In fact, We are ready now to open up our corrections window for graduation rate, except we have to build a system that allows us to run the 5-year. So that's going to delay that corrections window, but that's part of the transition to a new system. So we hope to have that completed sometime in November and be ready then to open up that corrections window for school districts to go in there. But it's going to be incumbent upon school districts to make sure that the data are accurate. So we'll have our best guess, but we'll need school districts to really check that so that we have great data quality as we start this. So let's look at what we know about our graduation rate. Lowest score is 11, so we have an anomaly. Highest score, 100%. That's where we like to see.
You know if that was an Adelaide school though?
On the lower end, I'm assuming. I don't know who any of the schools are. Denise has just been running state data, so we haven't run it to where we can actually see school names. We ran this, showed it to our technical advisory committee to see, is the ESSA school index reporting out data as we would have expected, or are there big anomalies that we need to go back in and ask a lot more questions about? So I would expect that that's probably one of our schools that has a dropout recovery or some type of program.
Are they addressed, those types of schools addressed in the ESSA plan?
They are not addressed in the ESSA plan. You cannot distinguish those schools in the ESSA plan, but they will be addressed in our state accountability system. Great question. So what do we know about graduation rate? Is it where you expected? Look at the 10th percentile. So we have a few schools, if you look from 40 up to about 70, 75 with some issues, but on the whole, sometimes with graduation rate, remember that high mobility students are counted in graduation rate. So it's very important for school districts to make sure they're following their drop rates, making sure they're tracking where kids are, to ensure that they're on time with their credits, that students are placed appropriately. So many times this is about good data, good clean practices, somebody being diligent. And our school districts that we're seeing on that upper end have got their procedures in place and they're following them to the letter. And they're seeing the results they're seeing the student results as a result of their hard work. And our fifth indicator, which is our fourth bullet, is of course student quality and student success. And this is where, I know it's hard for you to read, but looking on your screen you can see this is where we came back and said what were our stakeholders really wanting? What is school success and student success? What does school quality and student success really look like? And what we know about it is it's when all students are challenged to be the best, to be their best, and that all students have access to rigorous courses and multitudes of opportunity. And so we've tried to capture that in this index. And so now it'll be up to us to come back and examine this data. The exciting thing is going to be for school districts to come back in and look at it and say, wow, am I really giving kids access to everything that they might need to engage in? Or have we really been encouraging one group but not another group? Or kids that have done certain things. I've been in schools where depending on what you made on an algebra test, maybe you were encouraged or less encouraged to go on into rigorous courses. And those are the questions that can only be answered internally. at the local level. Sometimes it's about saying to parents, come on, let's try that. I'm not sure what the GPA will be, but let's try this more challenging course. So what does our data say? For the elementary level, again, we're on a 100-point scale. The lowest score was 34, and the highest score was 89. It's a tough index, isn't it? But if you look back on the sheet before, what was in there for elementary? What really is making the difference in elementary? Student engagement, science achievement, science growth, reading at grade level. Why would we want those? Why are those indicators of school quality? We need them to read. That's affecting that high school score all the way to the very last day, isn't it? Science. For the 21st century, we need that science background, and we need to be growing in science. But most importantly, we need them at school. We need that attendance. 178 days of rigorous quality instruction, engaged instruction. We've got room to grow. And that's what I hope school districts will do. I hope school districts will take this data and go back and say, wow, what can we do better for kids? What can we think about together? How do we put together a plan that's going to move the needle on this? Because if you move the needle on this indicator, what happens to the other indicators? They all move. Middle level?
And Deb, can't stress enough that these were selected from the feedback that we received during our trip around the state, you know, our focus groups, our stakeholder groups that, you know, we engaged with, and, you know, that feedback combined with the criteria in ESSA of what a measure had to meet to be acceptable. And so really this is driven by what educators told us they thought was important.
And
I think
parents.
that's something that we should have to continue to stress because at some point in time, you know, someone's school isn't going to fare as well as what they had hoped.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is here not to say, well, because you didn't fare as well, that means you're a bad school. It's to give you a tool to say, you know, I thought we were better than we were. This shows us that we have room to grow, and what do we do to make that happen?
And the exciting thing is this data helps us know where to have these conversations. So
as opposed to before, under No Child Left Behind, where you really, you know, it was that one measure, that one thing. It's like, okay, everybody, let's focus on that one test score. This takes into account those truly multiple measures of success that ultimately all build to that high school success.
And, you know, if you come back and just think about in the elementary, and we know that student engagement is one of those measures, I just think about as a classroom teacher when parents would say, hey, we're going to go someplace and he's going to miss a couple of days of school. He won't be missing anything, will he? And I want to say, yes. Yes, he's missing some very important days of learning. And hopefully, if we're doing a great job, kids are saying, I don't want to be out of school. I want to be there. I want to be engaged. I want to be learning. This is an opportunity for us to really rethink those conversations with students and parents and to rethink, are we really engaging the students? Do they want to be there? Are they engaged in the learning, or is the learning tedious? It can be hard, it can be challenging, but is there purpose to it? Do kids know why they're learning? So it really gives us a lot of opportunity for a lot of conversations. Middle school, Grades 6, 7, and 8, our low score was 25. Our high score was 75. So let's look back at elementary. 34 and 89, 25 and 75. So,
Does it play any okay, I'm trying to process this.
mm-hmm.
So for elementary, they have 4 factors that they're looking at. And for middle areas, it's 5, no, 4 things that they're also looking at.
So in elementary, there's, yes.
So that would be even, but then when they get to high school, there's 11 different.
Mhm.
So is that?
Does that play into?
Does that play into some of the data? And if so, then shouldn't high school be, you would think high school would be higher than it is. I'm jumping ahead, but I just
But
trying to.
in thinking about that, let's kind of think back. What happens here in the middle grades, 5 through 7? So, we've got student engagement, science achievement, science growth, reading at grade level, and then if any of them are taking any advanced classes or anything like that, those would count in there as well. So middle school, those begin when things really start to show up. If you're having reading problems, those kids start avoiding coming to school. They really start to show up. The science gets really challenging. And if you're not a good reader, science becomes even more challenging, right?
I'm curious about the math indicator as well. Was math like incorporated under different?
So math was back in our weighted achievement, math and reading. And the reason you see reading show up again here is, remember, we knew that reading is that constant that goes across all content areas. And with our RISE initiative, we wanted to pay more attention to reading, and knowing that we have a state of great poverty. Reading and vocabulary is critical to changing that. And high school. The lowest score was 12. The highest score was 75. But I want you to look at the distribution between middle school and high school. So in high school now, we've added ACT work keys, ACT readiness benchmark, that the best students are ready in all of the subjects, not just their composite score. Their GPA of 2.8 or better. Why GPA? Why did we put that in there? Because what you're doing in class matters, doesn't it? Community service learning credits. Yes, sir?
Pause just for a
Sure.
second on the GPA, because you all probably would be interested in knowing, some of the feedback that we've gotten on that, the concern expressed that grade inflation might come into play with that. Maybe, but because that is a sliver of a sliver within this overall, it's important, but if a school wants to engage in grade inflation, try to boost GPA, all those other indicators are going to show that that's not a reality. So we don't think there's going to be a lot of incentive to try to do the wrong thing when it comes to GPA. So if you hear that, you can tell folks, they've considered that, and here's why we don't think that's an issue. Because it is a measure, part of the measure of the overall quality of the high school experience. But trying to, just for the lack of a better word, to not do the right thing on that is not going to gain a school a great deal of positive change in that school.
I think that's what I'm so excited about our ESSA School Index, is because, one, we have multiple measures. That's what our stakeholders said they wanted. We weighted growth the way our stakeholders wanted. We're looking at those measures that really describe the students that we're wanting to, the student experience that we're wanting to provide. The thing is, can we do it for all students? And that's really, remember on that very last time when we met, I said, is this a plan of equity? Because it needs to be. And all of you said yes. Remember, I went around and polled you. Do you feel the equity in this plan? And that's what I'm so excited about, how our data are showing us. Our data shows us we've got work to do. But that's okay. Arkansans aren't afraid of hard work. We just want to make sure we're doing the right work. And that's what our data is going to help us to look at is, are we doing the right work for our students?
I want to say I'm happy that we have the computer science course credits earned as one component of this. We know that this is a major focus for our state, and our state has received a lot of recognition because of it. And I know that we'll make some adjustments to this plan as we go, but I do think that those computer science opportunities are expanding even lower than high school, and hopefully we'll be able to incorporate those in the future with some assessment.
It's exciting for what we're already seeing from our students, isn't it? It is. That's a great example. So just to kind of remind you that in this plan, as we put together this ESSA school index, we weighted those components as our stakeholders guided us. And then we'll use that information to make some really big decisions. Under our ESSA plan, we will need to identify our schools in need of comprehensive support. Now, what I hope that all of you will do is understand a couple of things. One is that schools in need of comprehensive support are ranked in the lowest 5% of our schools. And I hope that all of us will be very careful with our language. These are not labels to be applied to schools. These are schools that are going to get a lot of support because we're expecting great things from them. There will always be a lowest 5%. That's just how this numbers work. But being there doesn't have to be a shame. It just says that they're working so very hard for their kids. So in keeping with that, what will happen is for each of those grade configurations, for K-5, for 6-8, and for 9-12, the Title I schools will take their total score and they will be ranked from highest to lowest. Then we'll go up and calculate 5%, and that will be a cut line. So there'll be a cut line at K-5, 6-8, and 9-12. Those lines won't be the same because you just looked at data that shows the distributions are different, right? Just like we looked at the 50th percentile wasn't in the same place. So that 5% line won't be in the same place either. That 5% will identify us, the schools in need of comprehensive support. And that means that they're going to qualify for great support from this agency, that they're going to qualify for additional Title I funding through our 1003. That just means they're going to get additional help. But the exciting thing about that is if they improve, if our lowest 5% cut line moves up, what does that tell us about our state? We're working hard. We're doing the right things for kids. That's exciting to me. So I hope today we start that message about there's no shame in where you score on this index. There's only work to be done. And that's just all of us putting it together, bringing in our stakeholders, and getting together in a plan to get it done. Once we have identified those schools, they'll receive a letter from us, and we'll go from there with putting out support to them. But that support's not going to be one size fits all, and that's what's so exciting about the change to ESSA from No Child Left Behind. In No Child Left Behind, we had to write a list of sanctions that would be applied to any school that fell into that 5%. That's what's so exciting now is we're not applying sanctions. We're saying, let us help you. Let's look at your data. What do you need help with? And let's focus our attention there. So you'll see school districts writing district support plans. You'll see ADE writing support plans for those districts, but they won't be one size fits all. They're very customized based on the data. So if you remember that continuous cycle of improvement, it's what does the data tell us we need to work on, and we write a plan to address that data.
I can't remember in the plan the length of time that support would be provided for the lowest 5%.
3 years.
Okay.
3 years. And the reason that we didn't write any other exit plan to that is because it really does take 3 years to make substantial change.
Sure.
And we want to provide continuous support to those districts to ensure that that type of progress is going on.
That's good.
After that 3 year period, that's when we have to come back in, look at everything that we've done, make sure we're still going in the right direction, and we'll have to run our numbers all over again. And then there'll be a reset, and our goal is to move that cut line up, right? We want our lowest 5% to be much higher scoring. So that's how we will judge ourselves as to whether or not we've done a good job of supporting our districts. And that's hopefully how you will judge your district is my district really focused on their data, making improvements, and over time are they seeing that kind of change? And maybe that kind of change starts to show up in my school quality and student success indicator first before it starts to show up in growth or it starts to show up in achievement. But we celebrate that because that's where we start. In addition to identifying those schools in need of comprehensive support, those same cut lines will be used as we run the subgroup data. So for every subgroup, we identified 6 subgroups in our accountability system. White, African American, Hispanic, low SES, students with disabilities, and English learners. Those 6, we have to take their data, run their data through this entire process, and give them a score. If their score falls below those cut lines in any of those grade 3 grade configurations, then that school would get a notification saying, hey, you've got a subgroup that is underperforming. Let's get together and get a plan to help them. So we've really got to take a look at your data and make sure that students are being served. Now remember, we lowered our N count to 15. And do you remember why we did that?
To include as many schools as we could.
Right. To include as many students, as many schools as we could. Not because we're running away from providing support, but because we're running to support that's going to improve learning for kids. That's pretty admirable, and it's the right thing to do. So I think if we keep doing the right thing for kids, we'll always be in the right place. Questions, thought, reflections? It's a lot of data to take in, but it gives us a good place to start having conversations and setting the right tone for what we have.
Have you run any with this 16 data on this lowest 5% in the subgroups? Have you done any running of that yet?
So we've been doing some high-level kind of testing with the subgroups. We've been still trying to clean up some of the data questions, some of those business rules. Right now, it looks like a lot of the subgroups that would fall in that lowest 5% would be our students with disabilities subgroups. We have a lot to do to help students with disabilities. I mean, we've got to step up our core instruction game. We need to be giving them more, not less.
Finding teachers?
we've got to have we've got to have some great teachers. We've got to have teachers that really understand. We'll have some that fall because of we'll have some in the race. It's not as many of the low economic as I quite expected, which may say that we've been doing a better job addressing our own poverty. We'll see when we run the 17 data to see how that works out for sure. But we're already, kind of looking at that and thinking about what kind of support are we going to have ready for school districts when they come calling.
Debbie, can we talk about the growth again just for a second?
Sure.
I did a presentation to superintendents in our co-op area, and one question that came up that I think is probably a good thing for us to just reinforce and talk about is for the schools that have higher performing students, the concern was that how do you continue to grow and expand and meet that growth measure when they're already performing very high? And if they meet the expectation or the standard of performance, then they met growth. So whatever the growth model, whatever the design lays out, the numbers, and I may make sure I'm correct in this, that a higher performing student will have met growth if they meet whatever the standard performance indicator is, correct? And they'll have a model for themselves. For each student will have.
Each has their own model.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's
Correct.
really not a growth to standard, it's a growth to expectation. So if whatever your expected growth is, if you're an advanced student, whatever your expected growth is, if you meet that every year, you're at the 80. If you go beyond that, then you start moving up that scale. So those advanced kids can grow. And it can be demonstrated in this index.
Right. The concern was, since growth is 35% of their total, I guess, score, the concern was that a higher performing school may be performing higher than a school across the street, but their students, since they're already performing at a high level, if they've not grown, I guess, a significant amount, then it would appear that another school is growing.
So,
does that make sense?
Yes, kind of. Not as much as it would make sense to Dr. Rollo, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
But she was posed that question, and she had been running tests on the data to check that, and she said she was not seeing that indicated.
Good.
So she was seeing that those high-performing schools had high growth.
Okay, great.
So they were demonstrating both.
Good.
I can't tell you who they are because I haven't seen it, but I have confidence in her. And then when we shared at the technical advisory committee with our psychometricians, they were pleased with the way it was showing it was performing. Any other questions? Any concerns? I'm excited. All right, let's move on to the next part then. The next part is beginning to think about how we're going to help parents understand this data. And in ESSA, we're required to have a very simple, easy to understand method of reporting to parents. And our state has said that a school rating system, such as A to F, is a simple, easy way for parents to understand a school, how well a school is doing. And if I could say back to everyone, oh, if it were only that simple. But two things that we're doing. One is we are working very hard to think through what are going to be the best reporting mechanisms. What do those visuals need to look like on our website so that parents can truly understand the data about their school? And then also to think about how we would assign a letter grade. And so at our we've racked our brains. We come up with as many ways as you can imagine to think about how to assign letter grades. But when we took our ideas to the Technical Advisory Committee last week, was that last week, Tina? Was that last week? Week before last?
Yeah.
Time flies. They recommended that we do a student engagement process. And of course, that just makes sense. So in a student engagement process, it takes a little more time, but I think it's going to be well worth it. In this process, we will establish a performance profile for each indicator for each of the grade spans. So what does that mean? So we'll go back to the data, just like those charts I showed you, and say, if you were to draw a cut line, how would you divide that up as in high, middle, and low? So the reason I bring that to your attention is if we went back and look at weighted achievement, so if you click back to your weighted achievement page, then if you looked at that, where might you cut high? What's high achievement? And where would you cut to say, now this is low achievement? And then what you have in the middle is it's that moderate level, right? If we do that at on every one of our indicators, and if we do it at each grade level, and then you come back and set a weight to those, similar to the weight that we've done for ESSA, then you can put that onto a matrix and decide and assign A, B, C, D, and F. And the way that works is you come back as a stakeholder group and you say, what is an A? What does an A really mean? Does an A mean you're only perfect? Does an A mean that you had you were in the 4 high range and 2 middle ranges? Or 5 and 1? Or 3 and 3? What are all of those options for being considered an A? What is an A school? What does an A school really mean? And so I'll tell you, this is a process I've seen done before. I've never done it myself. We practiced it immediately after we had our TAC meeting to see if we could come back and replicate what they were advising us to do. And so a few of us just sat around and kind of walked through what that process might look like. But we're excited to recommend this process, to take this out and to go back and visit all of our stakeholders. And if you think back who our stakeholders are, they're students, they're parents, they're legislators, they're educators, they're administrators, they're charter directors, they're co-op directors, they're our teacher leaders, they're businesses, they're our organization partners that we want to bring in and engage in this process. And then we'd like to bring back to you the data from all of those groups and let you kind of walk through that process and help us finalize our recommendations to take to the state board. We feel like when we do that, we can walk away not just looking at a number, but really knowing something about our schools when we say they're a high-performing school.
When does the next AF go out? Is it this year or is it?
April 15th, 2018, this year. So we're on a kind of a tight timeline, but, and remember, we still have to do our 4-year and 5-year cohort graduation rate. That corrections window probably will happen sometime early December, we're hoping. So we'll be ready to get out and start running this engagement process as soon as we have all of our data in place.
We're expecting this plan to be approved in January, is that correct?
By January,
Okay.
yeah. Any questions about that process?
But now, this is separate from ESSA, right?
Yes, this is our state accountability piece. But it is separate, but it's not. So it really is a state requirement to assign A to F, but at the same time, ESSA requires us to have a parent-friendly way of communicating the progress of schools. So we'll have that along with our report card. We're really rethinking how we set that report card up so that everyone will always have access to all the data, but how do we, what does front page look like so that it's very clear to everyone. In fact, a team of us are going next week to Raleigh, North Carolina to meet with all the other states and talk about how do we report the data so that it's very clear to all of our stakeholders. Questions or comments? Yay, love it. Want to know more about it? Can't wait to see what it looks like. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is just like our plan, all of our stakeholders get to have a say in the results. How do we report this? So everybody gets to have a conversation, have part of the conversation, have a voice in the work. So that brings us to our last point of conversation, and that is planning for ESSA implementation. We need to do a lot of communicating with our stakeholders. And so one of the things that we're talking about is, and I want to get some feedback on this, especially from our school partners, is to go over all of this. I mean, you've been engaged in this now for a year, very intensely. You've read every draft that we've put out. So you've got a really strong background of information. But as we begin to think about this and start rolling this out to everyone, what we're thinking is we need to take each little component and just take some time to kind of walk through it, explain it, share this model data. If we have data from the schools, begin to share that data with them. Let them begin to kind of let it seep in and soak in, and then slowly build all of those components together to look at the index. Thoughts? Yay? Tell me what else you want to go with that. I mean, there's some very, just kind of obvious things that a school can work on when they look at their data. So is it important for us to bring those out?
I think it's important to put it in a way that it's not overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And easily accessible. And I mean, you already kind of said that, but in a very visual way and with short explanations. And then even go even further than that, putting it in some type of media that reaches the masses. And
so let's talk about that.
I really like what y'all did with the little Facebook Live
Mm-hmm.
videos when y'all explained the portions when
Mm-hmm.
the plan was still kind of going. And so having little lessons that way would be probably easy to,
And you could-
even if you break it down even further than that and not just
Mm-hmm.
do like overview, but do a couple days on.
Now, Tina and I talked about the video piece. If you could just, for each one of those bullets, just defining what that means and how it applies to the plan and how it applies to your school. I think just having little snippets of information, maybe not an hour-long video that covers everything, because someone may not need everything. They may just need one small piece to understand. I think it's a good idea.
So one of the things that we had kind of tossed around, I want your feedback on this is, and I like your idea of doing the Facebook Live again, is, a flipped classroom is you put your information out, you give people time to look at it, the video, whatever, and then you offer that time to come back in for Q&A. And so I was wondering what you thought about that is if we built those videos, Facebook Live or however we do them, if we build them and put them out for people and then say, hey, here's the video, watch it this week, and on Friday we're gonna, or whatever day, we're gonna be ready to open it up like for a Zoom or something where we can have Q&A.
That'd be great.
You like that idea of kind of giving time?
You can also do something similar to what they do with the Arkansas Ideas, you know, have short little, if these were your courses, you know, short little snippet things that they could go and they could pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
Pieces for that one.
It would be neat to tie in, and I don't know how far you want to take, I tend to be a little extra when I talk about stuff like this, but involving some of the technology students in different districts, that way they're kind of accountable for learning some of the, when you're invested in something, regardless of what the reason is, if you're invested in it, you're gonna understand and retain it, and so then doing some of those videos would be beneficial for those students and then whatever facilitators and things they have.
So elaborate a little bit. Give me an example.
For instance, doing, like, Hot Springs has an EAST program.
Mhm.
At their high school, we have it all the way, I think it's fifth up. But having that, one of those types of classrooms, really dig into, like, taking that material and having the facilitator just kind of facilitate their learning of learning the information, and then recreating some type of fun, quick informational video for kind of what you're saying, posting wherever, or putting on ADE, or I think it would be more interesting for parents are going to be
Mhm.
attached to it because their kids are working on it, so it kind of ties all of our stakeholders in.
Gotcha. Like it. So I've kind of given you a list of some of the big topics that I saw. First, to me, it's always figure out where I fit grade configurations. A little bit more on in size, as Gloria and I were discussing. No, as Joyce and I were discussing, people still don't really know what in size means. So, are there ways that we can explain that to help people better understand it? Maybe visually, putting some people together, and then just taking each one. Is that kind of your thoughts? And then, what does it mean to come back on the subgroups and run all of that again? That's really the telling piece. We ran this data just to kind of see, are we meeting the needs of subgroups in our state? And you won't be surprised to know that we have some school districts that are knocking it out of the park with groups of kids. That they really truly are meeting the needs of kids. That's what's going to be another really exciting piece of this, because we can recognize those schools so that you have someone to go and talk to, or we bring them in down the road to be some of those, lead some of those presentations about what their best practices are. So our data really looks at both sides to see, you know, who may need more support, but who may be leaders in solving some of these issues that many of us face. Any other topics that, if you just took some time to explain this?
I think you better include something on this school rating system so it will be open and transparent, and they don't think that we're trying to keep it a secret how each school or district is getting their rating.
Okay. I'll think that through with you, because I want to make sure that we've been very transparent in this process. Any other topics? So as you're going back through the plan and you're reading it again carefully from front to back, and you're saying, you're sending your emails to Tina and you're saying, hey, on page 42, this part could be better explained, or this visual could be better explained if it included some additional information about, or I'm not quite clear what this is. If you're sending that to her, then also as you're going through, if you're thinking, oh, if you just did a little video snippet on this, it's really going to help the public understand the work. That would be so much appreciated. Our plan is to, as soon as we have we'll be planning for when we'll have our completed 2017 data, but our plan will be to put out on our website a calendar of when these videos, these pieces will be available. What else do they need besides videos? We've wondered about doing like little one-page explanations.
Also like a running Q&A.
Oh, good.
FAQ for the next question.
So if people went into our Ask ADE comment section, we could, it's not Ask ADE, what is it, Tina?
ESSA comments.
ESSA comments. So if they went in there and asked a question, then it would automatically begin to show up when we responded, okay? So running Q&A. And one-page explanation.
Maybe terms and definitions that are commonly confused or misunderstood.
And that will be very helpful as you go back and read through to make sure that we've got all those terms and definitions listed.
So I know it may be really, really basic, but for folks who are outside of this room or outside of education, what is the 2-minute elevator speech that to tell parents and that why are we doing this? Why is this necessary? What is our end goal?
Perfect.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
But, you know, when you're outside of this world, it's pretty hard for people to understand what is it we're trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish?
That's great. That's perfect. What else?
In real simple terms.
Yes.
That even I can.
Yes. I'll have you proof it for me. Anyone else?
Probably the data might be a little confusing for some of our stakeholders. Some kind of explanation. I don't know what would be the best way to do that. Maybe a video. I don't know, but just a quick overview on how what we'd be looking at.
So one of the things we were thinking, Melissa, was to take, like when I did weighted achievement, to come back in with these types of visuals, these plus more if we need them. But I think it's important that, today is certainly a public day, but to put it with whatever that topic is we're talking about to show, okay, this is how our data are kind of laying out. And it's important to know this as a state, but it's important to know to be looking at your district. Right. It's important for co-ops to be looking at their regions because that's going to direct how professional development is planned. It has a lot of impact. What about questions, conversation questions, like would it be great if we put out on those one-pagers maybe some questions to engage conversation in your school district or with parents?
I think definitely a presentation that could be built and shared by all superintendents to their school board and community. Something that is just some basic information that would be easily understood and they could fully comprehend what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I think that's a great idea. And if it's designed in a way that would allow me to go into my Rotary Club meeting, my Civitan Club meetings, and just sharing with the community what this is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had a standard protocol for how we're presenting that information to build consistency with the message, I think that would be very helpful.
So you need that with some talking points.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's great. Good idea. So do you want the kind of condensed overview version of all of it, or do you want multiple presentations where you can go back with each component.
I don't think you have to go over all the components in depth. I think just a general overview of all of it is probably best.
Okay. Good.
So why is it important to you as a citizen in this district? Why these changes? Where do we hope to have all of our kids be and go? So, you know, that's the Rotary Club guy for the bank can understand.
Right.
Or whatever. It's just really got to be, what is the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish?
How does it impact, you talked about equity, how does it impact closing the achievement gap that we're looking at? Those are the things that the public would be interested in.
That's where the students can come in, the heart wrenching, this is what it looks like, you know, could we, you know, look at for us to look at pros versus, you know, comparing us to a standard or a certain number.
That's good. I gave a similar overview recently to a Rotary Club, and we just talked about their kids and their grandkids. You know, what does this really mean? What's it mean to your community? I mean, it's a game changer for communities. And they really got into that conversation of, you know, education means economy. And the one I was speaking to, they really get that. How if they educate, the jobs come. If they educate, people stay in that community. Parents may have to go to another community to work, but they want their kids to be there. They'll live there. So
What it all boils down to.
that's right. All right, this is perfect. Thank you for that feedback. And come to our website. We encourage everybody that's watching today to come in and provide recommendations to us. We've got all those links still up to provide comments, and it's very important that we get that feedback. So as we move forward to next steps, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Key for if you've got additional recommendations. You've given us a great list. We don't have our next meeting scheduled yet. When I wrote this PowerPoint, I was thinking that possibly December would be a good time to come together and look at how the stakeholder engagement data were showing us. But when I found out we're going to have to write a new system to put out the corrections window for a 5-year cohort, it's going to take us a little longer than that. So we may have to be a little responsive to when we actually have our data and when we can get those meetings out there. So I don't know if when we need to have one, or if we just need to say change that to be determined. So Commissioner, I'll turn it back over to you.
What would be helpful for you all coming back together timing wise and moving forward, you know, just helping us determine how to best disseminate all this information and everything. And I know that, you know, all of you driving Little Rock may not be a necessity when we can do a lot of this through calls if there are times that are, you know, in between time that we would want to actually have a gathering like this. But, you know, there are states that are doing tours again. You know, we think that there's going to be a lot of communication that's going to be needed as we roll out the components of this, not just this part, but we really need your thoughts on the best way moving forward, because it's now that we're in the implementation phase, and also to know that there are some things that we have to keep doing before we know what the federal government, what the U.S. Department of Education is going to tell us as far as the feedback. So will it be helpful to you as educators, you as parents, you as advocates, you as representatives of those other groups, many groups that are out there. Like Kelly, the PTA. I know they get information from the national organization. Is it in line with what they're hearing from us? And if there are gaps, how can we close and fill those gaps? Same way with the national principals organizations and EL organizations and other, the superintendents, AASA, did I get that right? Because one of the things we have encountered is my reference to that Title IV conversation. There are advocacy groups that are out there saying, hey, this is in ESSA and this is what you need to be doing to advocate for your position. Well, we don't want to discount any of those groups or the information they're getting. We just want it to be aligned, or if there's anything that we're saying that's confusing or you are kind of our conduit for much of that information to come back to us. So kind of open it up for conversation about what you think valuable next steps would be, in addition to what we've already talked about here. Go ahead, Melissa.
I think, kind of going back and talking to, just having these conversations and start posing these questions and start thinking about how to share more information. We just continue to share kind of what's in the plan, and then maybe if we can't come back fully together, either a small group or by a conference call, or even just an accountability thing. Let's say in November, Tina's going to email us and share everything that you've accomplished so far, and then move maybe from there into, if we need to get back together and do more or change the direction.
We could do it by Zoom. You could still see each other and you could interact with each other, and you wouldn't have to travel.
I think as long as we all know what the expectation is of what we plan to share, what information we need to get out, I think we'll be able to accomplish it. I think through AAEA, which reaches many associations that you mentioned, Arkansas State Teacher Association, AEA, all of those different groups, we can share our presentation and share the information we want to get out. But just knowing what message we're wanting to send in a consistent manner, I think it'll help us accomplish our goal of being able to communicate this. It's a lot of information, and I think what Senator English said is right. I don't think everyone needs all of the details of the information. Certainly there are going to be groups that are more interested than others, where we may have to elaborate, but I do think it's important that we're consistent in what we're sharing.
Okay. All right. Well, Tina, any other thoughts? Okay. Just one last ask then, if anything that you think might be helpful or feedback that this is the time, this is the group that we need to hear from, especially on the part that, hey, folks just don't understand X. And if you get that feedback, or just in conversation, even if it's not a formal response that you're hearing from somebody, we just encourage you to give us that feedback, let us know, so we can try to be as frequent as we need to be, because sometimes it's not the lack of clarity, it's just the lack of frequency of having, of us being out there talking about the information. We assume, because we live it every day, but we know that classroom teachers are teaching every day. They don't have time to sift through all the information. Principals are doing their things every day, students. And so we just need you to help us be our accountability partner to make sure that we're getting that information out in clear and understandable methods. All right. So we will keep you up to date on progress, let you know when we hear something back. It could be any time, any day that we get a call from U.S. Department of Education saying, hey, we'd like to schedule these discussions with you. We'll keep you posted on that and progress there too. All right, Deb?
We really need everyone reading the plan one more time.
Yeah.
Because we want to be prepared for that phone call.
Right. Yeah, and that can't overstress that it's a living document. What we submitted is subject to revision, and folks need to understand that they can still give us feedback. The whole concept of publishing our red line edits, that's real. I think that's a very important part of this process as far as being transparent. And so if you hear things like, oh, well, I wanted to say this, but it was too late. No, it's not. It's not too late at all. Please go ahead and encourage folks to give us that feedback. All right. Comments from anyone else? All right.
I just want to thank everyone for all the hard work they did to help us get our plan in. And Tina and Tiffany did an amazing job of putting all that together into one document. But it was a state effort to make that happen, and now we're calling upon them to help us implement it.
Yep.
So that's got to be a state effort as well.
So it was your efforts and educators' efforts to develop it. It will be your efforts, our efforts collectively to implement it, and it will be our efforts collectively to improve on it as we move along. All right. If there's no other business in, we are adjourned.
So let me ask you this question. One of the things that I see